Salut miteinander! Today I'm going to show you how I made my unravel cosplay. Yarny is a little adventurer which you help receive memories in the Norwegian landscape. I chose it because of its cuteness, but also because it would be very challenging to imitate this woolen figurine. First, I researched for a good reference picture online, and I found a tutorial actually on how to make a Yarny. I took this picture and a sketch of myself for proportions to find out how big each part of the cosplay would be. Mask, shirt, leggings, shoes and gloves are separate and required a different trick. But first things first, how would I be able to imitate wool on a larger scale? I heard of chunky yarn and thought to myself, I can do that myself. Little did I know how much work this would be, but it was absolutely worth it. For scale, I checked how thick a common wool thread is, about 3 mm, estimated how big Yarny actually might be, about 17 centimeters. So I concluded that it would need to be 10 times thicker, the yarn, than a normal thread, because I am 10 times taller than the Yarny. To decide which fabric to use, I made tubes out of different types of fabrics. And because of the distinct color, this special red I wanted, and my budget, I chose a red jersey in the end. However, this has a catch. I will first have to sew my chunky yarn out of woven cotton fabric and then cover it with the jersey. The jersey tube will then be slightly thinner than the cotton chunky yarn because that looks better. So let's do this! I made 42 meter of a stripe in woven cotton fabric and stuffed that and sewed it shut by hand. 18 episodes of Star Trek Voyager later, I can cover it now with a 35 meter long tube of jersey, which is shorter than the woven fabric because it stretches. The trick was to use a rubber glove to cover the chunky yarn with the jersey. Another 5 episodes of Star Trek later, I have my chunky yarn and it looks amazing. It looks like it is ready to become a blanket or whatever, but it's gonna be a cosplay. With the chunky yarn finished, I started on the leggings. I tested how I could make a fabric that imitates the look of wrapped around wool, and found that fabric made of stripes looks fantastic. In comparison, chunky yarn around my arms and legs would look bulky and out of proportions. For the leggings, I copied an existing pair of leggings with a similar stretch as my fabric and started to create the fabric by cutting long stripes out of my fabric with a width of 3 centimeters plus seam allowance. As not to waste fabric, I laid out my fabrication on top of the pattern, and when the fabric for one pattern part was finished, I could cut it out. Then I could assemble the leggings. I designed the top with a t-shirt as a base for the chunky yarn. The sleeves should be constructed the same way as the leggings, and I used a raglan sleeve pattern out of a book I own, but you could also copy an existing t-shirt. The raglan sleeves ensure that the illusion of wool goes over the shoulder. I made sure that the torso was long enough to cover my butt, and also elongated the sleeves up to my wrists. I added fusible interfacing to the torso to strengthen the fabric for the weight of the chunky yarn. I tested the fit of the shirt first by attaching one sleeve to it before I constructed the sleeve fabric. Next up, the mask. I started with the main form of the mask. I drew it onto paper and then put it into the 3D form. I used a lot of painter's tape to do that. Then I covered this with 2 layers of paper mache. I used a thick paper, which I first let soak in the starch glue. After this dried for a day with the help of a fan, I marked the yarn on the mask to be filled in with paper mache. I also had to place the eyes and, most important, the holes for me to see when I walk. Then I started the process of yarning it up with paper mache. I used a lot of starch glue in the process, and in the end covered everything with a thin layer of tissue paper because it started crackling. Editing Claudia here, I really didn't emphasize what an emotional roller coaster this mask was, because it was like a week before the con and it had to dry, and it dried so slowly, and then it started to get cracks and I didn't know what to do, and I slept over it, and then but couldn't, and was up again, and then I had the idea with this paper mache like to make a thin layer of paper over it so that the cracks wouldn't show. And that thankfully worked, but I wasn't quite sure if it looked good, and only when the paint job was finished I was really happy how it looked. In the meantime, I could start attaching the chunky yarn to the shirt. I used the mask to mark the neckline and then stuffed the arms of the shirt to imitate my shoulders, and I could start hand sewing the chunk yarn to the shirt by wrapping it around again and again and again. To create some asymmetry, I didn't do it straight all around. To secure the yarn, I sewed it punctually to the shirt. To cover my hands in chunky yarn, I sewed up some gloves where I caught the yarn in the seams of the glove. With that done, it was time to get back to the mask, which was now dry enough to be painted. I started by cutting out the eye holes and then primed it 2 times. Same with the shoes, prime them 2 times. Then I had to test the right red. I did this systematically by writing down the mixing rates. I let the paint dry and compared it to the fabric in daylight. Then I mixed up a big batch of paint and started painting the mask. While the mask was drying, I used some fabric paint for the shoelaces, which I later then also covered in the paint I used for the mask and the shoes. I painted 2 coats of red paint over everything: the mask, the shoes, the laces. We are already at the last step. So I had to cover the shoes in chunky yarn. For that, I actually used up the very last bit of hot glue, and it was after shop closing time on the day before the con, and I was finished and very proud, very proud. I put it on my dress form and I was like just wow. And then I wore it the next day to Fantasy Basel, which was actually my first ever con, and it was so much fun and so rewarding to get recognized and photographed. And I can just say now, enjoy the reveal and hopefully see you in the next video. Tschüssli miteinander!